Beneath calm waves and clear skies, something deadly stirs. From rogue whales to silent sharks, these 6 real-life encounters push the limits of survival at sea. Military missions, solo voyages, and peaceful swims turn into nightmares in an instant. These aren't tales of myths, they're raw, tense, and unforgettable accounts of nature striking back where humans thought they ruled. On May 12, 2025 at 7 a.m., a U.S. Navy rigid-hull inflatable boat, RHIB, sped across the deep blue waters off the coast of San Diego. The 28-foot rigid-hull inflatable boat, powered by twin outboard engines, carried 6 special operations officers. Their mission was routine in nature but carried significant risk. A classified mid-frequency sonar calibration as part of an ongoing undersea surveillance project. The team was seasoned. Lieutenant Jack Monroe, 34, was in command, a career operator known for his calm under pressure. Beside him stood Petty Officer First Class Ryan Hayes, 29, a specialist in acoustic warfare. Ensign David Patel, 26, handled navigation. The others, divers Lucas Briggs, 31, and Matt Cruz, 30, along with Corpsman Sarah Greer, 33, had been through dozens of these exercises before. All were confident, focused, and alert. They were 12 nautical miles offshore, seas calm, visibility high. As the rigid-hull inflatable boat slowed, Hayes activated the sonar unit. The pulses throbbed beneath the surface, strong and rhythmic. The goal was data collection, signal propagation, and depth analysis. It was simple on paper, but in the vast quiet beneath them, something else listened. An adult male orca, roughly 30 feet long and weighing more than 8,000 pounds, had been tracked in the area the week prior. Tagged by marine biologists, the whale had shown erratic swimming patterns and aggressive behavior near fishing vessels. No one had seen it that morning, until it struck. The impact came without warning. A monstrous black and white form surged from the depths and slammed the boat at full speed, lifting it off the water like a toy. The hull cracked and split as metal and rubber folded inward. The rigid-hull inflatable boat flipped violently, tossing all 6 crew members into the cold Pacific. Monroe's head struck the edge of the console as he went under, dazed and disoriented. Salt water rushed into his nose and lungs. He surfaced in a wash of foam and twisted debris, struggling to find orientation. He saw Patel and Greer clinging to a floating storage case. Briggs yelled from 20 feet away, waving one arm, the other broken and limp at his side. Cruz was bleeding from his leg, trying to swim toward a bobbing fuel canister. Hayes was nowhere in sight. Then the water beneath them erupted again. The orca returned with terrifying force. It breached just enough to reveal its size, then dove straight at Briggs. The impact knocked the diver beneath the waves, vanishing in a surge of red and white churn. The others screamed, but they couldn't see him. Cruz tried to swim toward Briggs, but the orca intercepted, its enormous mouth clamping onto Cruz's side. It thrashed, dragging him down, then let go and surged back toward the surface. Cruz emerged moments later, alive but unconscious, floating on his back in a spreading slick of blood. Monroe and Greer grabbed his vest and dragged him to a flat piece of the shattered hull. Patel helped stabilize him as best they could. Blood stained everything. They could see the orca circling beneath them, its dorsal fin slicing through the surface like a blade. Hayes finally surfaced, gasping, face cut open, eyes wide with horror. He'd been pulled under with the boat's console and barely escaped. He swam to the others, one-handed, the other arm dangling uselessly. All of a sudden, they heard Briggs screaming. They saw him surfacing, battling the waves. He was alive. He too swam to the others, using every ounce of his remaining strength. Mercifully, the orca didn't strike again as he made his way to the other men. Minutes passed like hours. The whale made no further immediate strikes, but it lingered nearby, visible just beneath the surface. Occasionally, it dove deep and vanished, only to reappear closer as if stalking. The survivors held their breath each time it passed beneath them. A distress beacon had triggered automatically when the rigid-hull inflatable boat capsized, and the Navy's offshore base had picked up the signal. But response time in open water was never instant. The 5 survivors clung to the debris, every splash and ripple around them a threat. Cruz moaned once, then fell silent. Greer checked his pulse. Faint, barely there. They held on. Cold set in. The sun rose higher, but it did little to warm them. Monroe's head throbbed from the impact. Hayes's arm was likely dislocated or fractured. Then they heard it, a distant thumping in the air. It was a Navy Seahawk helicopter drawn by the beacon and emergency call. It approached fast, rotor wash flattening the waves. A rescue diver dropped into the water as the Orca finally dove and did not return. Cruz was lifted first, followed by Hayes, Greer, Patel, Briggs, and finally Monroe. They scanned the water one last time. Only the shattered remains of the rigid-hull inflatable boat and the echo of what had happened remained behind. Back at the Naval Hospital, doctors worked fast. Cruz survived despite multiple lacerations and severe blood loss. Hayes's arm was broken in 2 places. Monroe had a concussion and cracked ribs. Briggs's arm was also broken. Greer and Patel were physically intact but deeply shaken. An internal report followed. The sonar deployment had coincided almost exactly with the Orca's appearance. Marine biologists brought in by the Navy determined the attack was likely provoked by neurological distress caused by sonar exposure. The whale, previously observed as disoriented, may have interpreted the signals as a threat or simply experienced pain and confusion. Sonar can cause pressure disturbances and internal disorientation in whales, leading to beachings or erratic behavior. The Navy declined to comment publicly on the event. No footage was released. The sonar testing program was temporarily suspended pending review. Internally, the incident was classified as a biological aggression incident under environmental duress. The Orca was never seen again. Tag signals ceased 2 days after the attack. Some believed the whale may have succumbed to internal injuries or stress. Others believed it had simply left the area, retreating into the deep. The officers returned to duty weeks later, each marked in their own way. They spoke little of that day afterward. To the public, it was recorded as a training accident. To the 6 who lived it, it was something far more violent and primal. A moment when nature struck back, silent and merciless, from the cold blue below. The morning sun rose gently over the South African shoreline, casting a golden shimmer across the turquoise sea. It was early May, and the waters near the eastern cape were calm, warm, and alluring. The beach stretched untouched for miles, framed by rugged cliffs and soft dunes. It was the perfect escape for 32-year-old Jessica Morgan, a British travel blogger who had arrived days earlier with 2 close friends for a 10-day trip along the Garden Route. Jessica was adventurous and fit, with a passion for wild places. She'd swum with reef sharks in Fiji, snorkeled in Indonesia, and hiked the cliffs of Ireland in storms. This trip was supposed to be a celebration, a break from the digital world and a deep breath before a new chapter. Her friends, Melissa and Dana, joined her that morning as they waded past the gentle breakers, laughing and treading water just beyond the last rolling wave. The beach was nearly empty. A lone lifeguard watched from his tower, scanning the water with lazy eyes. There were no warning flags, no signs of danger. The sea seemed still and welcoming. Beneath its surface, however, shadows moved unseen. A mile off the coast, dense groups of seals had begun their seasonal migration, darting through the currents in huge, twisting clouds. Following them, silently and without warning, was one of the ocean's most feared predators. A fully grown female great white, nearly 17 feet long and weighing close to 2 tons, had been trailing the colonies for days. Her movements were slow, calculating, guided by hunger and instinct. Jessica floated on her back, arms stretched out, smiling at the sky. Melissa and Dana stayed closer to shore, treading water and calling out now and then, but they were drifting apart slightly as the current shifted. No one saw the shark approach. It came from below, from a depth where light barely reached. There was no dorsal fin, no disturbance on the surface, just a flash of movement, a shadow rising fast through the blue. The great white struck with terrifying force. Jessica vanished beneath the surface in an instant. The shark breached partially, jaws wide, and clamped down on her upper leg with bone-crushing pressure. The water exploded in foam and blood. Her scream tore through the air just as she was pulled under. Melissa turned at the sound and froze. Dana started swimming toward her before sheer panic took hold and she turned back, screaming toward the beach. Jessica resurfaced, thrashing wildly, her face twisted in agony. The shark's serrated teeth had torn deep into her thigh, exposing muscle and bone. Blood clouded the water as she tried to stay afloat, one leg nearly useless. The shark dove again, circling beneath her. The lifeguard had seen the commotion and leapt from his tower, blowing his whistle and waving toward the jet ski operators, already prepping nearby. They raced across the water within minutes, slicing toward the attack site where Jessica was still barely afloat. The shark made a second pass, this time less visible, bumping her from below and dragging her under again. When she came back up, her face was pale, her eyes glazed, and her leg was a shredded mess. 2 lifeguards on jet skis approached at full throttle, using the noise and motion to disrupt the predator. One lifeguard dove into the water and pulled Jessica to him, securing her to the rescue sled as fast as he could. She had lost an enormous amount of blood, her skin cold and clammy. Her breaths were shallow, coming in short gasps. The shark didn't follow. It had vanished into the depths, its assault complete. Jessica was rushed to the shore and placed on the sand, where a trauma team from the beach's medical station began first aid. A tourniquet was applied and oxygen was administered. A helicopter, summoned minutes earlier, descended to the beach with deafening rotors and lifted her into the sky. But time had already worked against her. She went into cardiac arrest mid-flight. Paramedics fought to revive her, but the loss of blood and trauma to her body had been too severe. Jessica was pronounced dead upon arrival at the nearest hospital in Port Elizabeth. Her friends arrived an hour later, still in shock, still covered in her blood. Marine officials investigated the attack. They confirmed that SEAL activity in the area had sharply increased in recent weeks. The shark had likely been drawn close to shore by the noise and movement of prey. It had struck in a state of high alert, mistaking Jessica's form for a seal. The beach was closed indefinitely, and drone patrols were increased along the stretch of coastline. The incident sparked immediate national attention. News outlets broadcast the tragedy widely, raising concerns about the growing number of large predators along recreational beaches. Experts urged caution, citing a pattern of increased shark activity tied to warming waters and shifting marine food chains. Several conservationists pointed out that the attack, while horrific, was part of a growing imbalance between human recreation and wildlife behavior. Jessica's family arrived days later, met by officials and grief-stricken friends. Her belongings were returned in silence. A makeshift memorial formed along the beach entrance. Flowers, notes, and candles placed by locals and travelers who never knew her but felt the weight of her death. Her blog, once filled with stories of beauty and wonder, became a memorial in itself. Thousands of readers flooded the final post with condolences. She had lived with boldness, people wrote. She had seen the world's edges. She had died doing something she loved, though no one said it without a tremble of sadness. The great white was never found again. Drones patrolled the coast and shark spotters watched the waves, but the ocean gave no answers. It rarely does. In the wake of the attack, new safety measures were proposed. Barrier nets, sonar buoys, and more aggressive patrols. But none could promise safety. The sea remained untamed, its vastness hiding both beauty and violence. For those who were there that day, the image of the turquoise water turning red, the stillness that followed the screams, and the helplessness of watching from shore would never leave them. What was once paradise had become a place of loss, shaped forever by a single devastating moment beneath the waves. The air was heavy with humidity on that March morning in 2023 as the dive unit prepared to enter the water in Jacksonville. The estuary, just northeast of the city, was a murky stretch of brackish river flanked by reeds and mangroves. It was quiet, the surface still, but beneath it flowed a restless current, clouded with sediment and debris. Detective Sergeant Kyle Benton, a seasoned diver with over a decade in underwater recovery, was leading the operation. At 39, he was calm under pressure, methodical and built like a linebacker, traits that had earned him respect on the force. The mission that day was grim. A double homicide had rocked a nearby neighborhood 2 weeks earlier, and a suspect had confessed to dumping the murder weapon off a back road bridge. The dive team's job was to locate the gun, which prosecutors hoped would provide critical ballistic evidence. Visibility in the estuary was practically zero. The water was thick with mud, algae, and runoff. Even with high-powered dive lights, the divers would be feeling more than seeing. They would rely on compass headings, metal detectors, and sheer patience. The team entered in pairs. Kyle and Officer Marcos Rivera, a strong swimmer and former Navy diver, were assigned to grid a 10-meter radius just north of the bridge piling. They sank slowly into the gloom, the light vanishing within seconds. At the bottom, they worked by touch, fanning the muck with gloved hands and sweeping detectors across the riverbed. The water pressed in on all sides. Silt billowed with every movement. Above them, the surface shimmered faintly, but from where they were, it might as well have been 100 feet up. There was no sound but the hiss of their regulators and the gentle hum of the current. Unseen by the divers, they were not alone. Bull sharks were common in Florida's brackish estuaries, especially in spring. The warm waters and abundant prey made the tidal rivers ideal hunting grounds. One particular shark, an adult female nearing 9 feet in length, had been lingering in the estuary for days, moving with the tide and feeding on fish, crustaceans, and the occasional bird. When Kyle stirred up the riverbed with a sweep of his hand, the disturbance sent vibrations through the water. The shark already nearby picked up the signals. Murky water and chaotic movement can trigger a mistake in even the most cautious predator. As the diver shifted again, the shark darted forward. It struck without warning. The impact was brutal. The shark latched onto Kyle's lower right leg, jaws locking just below the knee. His body jerked violently as teeth pierced the thick neoprene of his suit and tore into flesh. The bite was swift, crushing, and followed by a savage thrash. The force yanked Kyle sideways into the mud, the detector flying from his hand. His scream was muffled in the regulator, but Rivera, just meters away, saw the burst of bubbles and the sudden chaos. He grabbed Kyle by the harness and kicked upward, towing him toward the surface. The shark had released after the initial strike, likely realizing the target wasn't food. But the damage was already catastrophic. Tendons severed, bone exposed, and blood leaking into the dark water like ink. Above, the team on the boat spotted the emergency signal. Backup divers and medics scrambled as Kyle broke the surface, gasping, his face pale and eyes wide with shock. Rivera hauled him aboard, and within seconds another officer clamped a tourniquet high on the leg. The blood loss was severe and the wound grotesque, deep, jagged, and gaping. They radioed for medevac. The helicopter arrived in minutes, rotors hammering the humid air as Kyle was loaded in. He remained conscious but barely, clinging to life as the crew worked to stabilize him. At the trauma center, surgeons fought to save the leg. Hours of delicate surgery followed, and miraculously they succeeded. He would walk again, though not without a permanent limp and months of rehabilitation. Later that afternoon, another dive team returned to the site. The search resumed, despite the trauma. Divers found the gun less than 6 feet from where the attack occurred, partially buried under a layer of silt, tangled in plant roots. Forensics confirmed it matched the ballistic profile of both homicides. The evidence was decisive, and the suspect, already in custody, was later convicted. The incident sent ripples through police diving units across the state. Though rare, shark attacks on law enforcement divers weren't unheard of, especially in brackish waters with low visibility. But this event, so close to shore and during a standard recovery, changed the calculus. The police department issued new protocols within weeks. From now on, no team would dive in known shark habitats without deploying acoustic deterrents. Additional safety divers, trained in emergency extraction, would accompany all missions. Pre-dive sonar sweeps became mandatory, even in murky river systems. The goal was not to eliminate risk, an impossible task, but to reduce surprise encounters in dangerous waters. Kyle didn't return to diving. His injury ended his operational fieldwork, but he stayed with the department, eventually transitioning into training and tactical planning. He became an advocate for diver safety, helping departments nationwide learn from what nearly killed him. The estuary where the attack occurred returned to its quiet rhythm. Birds sang in the reeds, and the tide moved as it always had. The bull shark was never found again. In all likelihood, it had moved with the current, uninterested in the attention it had drawn. To it, the strike had been a mistake, an instinctive response in a confusing environment. But for the dive unit, for Kyle, and for every officer who stood on that boat and watched their teammate bleed out on the deck, the moment left a permanent mark. It was a reminder that nature does not wait for permission. Even in places shaped by law and order, the wild remained just beneath the surface, silent, unseen, and always capable of erupting with brutal force. The clear turquoise water around the Exuma Islands shimmered in the December sun, hiding what lurked just beneath. The spearfishing group had launched their small boat just after sunrise. The plan was simple: dive the reefs near the drop-off, take only what they needed, and be back by midday. They were experienced, respectful of the sea, and familiar with the area's shallow coral shelves. Among them was 32-year-old Josh Langley, a fit and skilled free diver from Tampa. He had made this trip twice before with his close friends, Darren and Theo, both seasoned spearfishers. Josh prided himself on precision, clean shots, efficient dives, and never overfishing. That morning they'd already taken a few snapper and one decent hogfish. The water was calm, visibility was good, and the reef was teeming with life. As they moved toward a shallower patch near a shelf just 200 yards from shore, Josh spotted a large grouper easing between coral heads. He dove without hesitation, steadying his breath as he descended to 15 feet. With practiced ease, he lined up his shot and speared the fish clean through its side. The grouper thrashed hard, struggling against the shaft. Josh secured it with one hand, turned toward the boat, and kicked upward. But he had made a critical decision. He wasn't using a float line. The fish was heavy, bleeding steadily, and now pressed against his body as he swam. His friends, scanning the water nearby, were already on alert. Darren had seen movement in the distance, just a shadow at first, but it vanished into deeper water. Theo surfaced, pulled off his mask, and called to the boat operator to keep the engine idling. Josh was 20 feet from the boat when it struck. The tiger shark came in fast from the right, out of the blue-green haze, drawn by the blood trail and sudden vibration. It was an enormous female, over 14 feet long, thick-bodied, and known in local circles. She had been spotted near this reef before, her boldness growing each season. Tourists who chummed illegally during snorkeling excursions had conditioned her to associate humans with easy meals. She didn't hesitate. In one horrifying surge, she slammed into Josh's side and bit through the grouper and part of his torso. Teeth like serrated blades tore into his abdomen and lower ribs. His body buckled as the shark wrenched away, a trail of red expanding instantly around him. The impact knocked his mask loose and spun him in the water. Theo and Darren turned just as Josh screamed underwater, limbs flailing as he tried to surface. Blood clouded the water in seconds. The shark circled again, slower now, tasting the blood and flesh in the current. Theo shouted for help and dove, spear in hand, while Darren sprinted across the reef top, kicking hard toward his friend. Theo struck the shark on the flank as it veered in again, his spear glancing off its tough skin. Darren followed, stabbing at its snout and gill slits. The shark turned and fled briefly, more from the sudden resistance than fear, but it circled just outside visibility, watching. Josh was barely conscious. His side was torn open, the wound catastrophic. Darren got under one arm while Theo grabbed the other. They kicked together, yelling for the boat. Blood trailed behind them like a banner, drawing the shark closer with each stroke. The boat reached them within seconds. Hands reached down and dragged Josh aboard, his body limp, skin already pale. His eyes rolled, his chest shuddering as he gasped for air. Darren knelt beside him, pressing down on the wound, trying to slow the bleeding, but there was too much. Muscle, bone, and organs had been ripped open. Blood soaked the deck beneath them. Theo radioed for emergency response while the boat roared back toward shore. They were only a few minutes out, but every second was slipping away. Josh lost consciousness before they reached the dock. Paramedics were waiting, but it was too late. He had bled out within minutes of the bite. Word of the attack spread quickly. Spearfishers, dive guides, and marine biologists descended on the area in the following days. The incident rattled locals, not just because a man had died, but because it happened in only 15 feet of water, just a short swim from a popular snorkeling zone. Tiger sharks were not new to the Exumas, but their boldness was growing. Reports had been mounting for years about them approaching swimmers and divers, especially in shallow areas where baited dives had taken place. Some guides had warned repeatedly about tourists chumming the water to attract marine life for photos. Those warnings had gone largely ignored until now. Marine officials conducted a full review. Data showed a spike in shark aggression in areas previously used for baited shark dives. They concluded that the behavior in this shark wasn't random. It was conditioned. She had learned to associate the smell of fish blood and even the presence of humans with feeding opportunities. In the weeks that followed, authorities took action. Baited dives were banned outright in the region. Stricter regulations were placed on spearfishing, requiring float lines and limiting areas where divers could operate. Guides were ordered to report illegal chumming, and enforcement increased along the reef zones. Darren and Theo gave statements and later helped push for educational outreach. They shared their story with other divers, not to spread fear, but to emphasize the importance of respect and caution. Josh's name became well known in the free diving and spearfishing community, a somber reminder of how quickly things could go wrong, even for the experienced. The reef eventually settled back into rhythm. Fish returned to their coral shelters, and the shark was seen again briefly days later. But then she vanished, possibly migrating, possibly still lurking somewhere near the edge of the shelf. Josh's gear remained packed in the corner of Theo's garage. No one touched it. The sea gave no apology. It had done what it always did, moved without malice, but with power and instinct. The blood that bloomed in those shallows was a stark reminder that even paradise has its predators. The North Atlantic in October was unforgiving. Waves rolled endlessly under gray skies, and the wind tore across the surface with cold, blunt force. For 38-year-old Eli Drexler, a veteran solo sailor from Maine, this was part of the challenge. He was competing in a transatlantic race, a grueling test of skill and endurance that had drawn some of the world's most resilient mariners. Eli wasn't in it for fame. He sailed for solitude, for the push against nature's indifference. But on October 16, 2023, 300 miles southwest of the Azores, the sea turned from rival to predator. Just before midday, Eli's trimaran struck a half-submerged shipping container. The collision was sudden and catastrophic. The hull crumpled at the starboard outrigger, and within seconds, water flooded the main cabin. Eli scrambled to deploy his emergency raft as the vessel listed hard, groaning as it gave up to the Atlantic. He barely had time to grab his emergency position indicating radio beacon, a flare pack, a flashlight, and a small knife before the boat capsized entirely. He pulled himself into the inflatable raft, soaked, shaking, but alive. The sun dipped low as afternoon gave way to dusk. Eli activated the emergency beacon, knowing it could take hours for a signal to be picked up and even longer for help to arrive. His raft bobbed in the swells like a cork, drifting slightly east. Clouds thickened overhead. He focused on staying calm, conserving energy, and hoping his signal would be picked up by a passing freighter or aircraft. As twilight deepened, Eli first noticed the presence of something beneath. A subtle thump against the bottom of the raft jolted him upright, then another. The water around him shifted, sloshed differently. Something was circling. He leaned over, holding the flashlight toward the sea, and what he saw drained the warmth from his body. Several oceanic white-tip sharks were moving just below the surface, their distinctive long pectoral fins slicing through the swells. Bold and aggressive, these sharks were known to approach rafts and shipwreck survivors. Their reputation for harassing and attacking humans in open water was well documented, especially from naval tragedies during wartime. Now Eli was alone in their territory. One of the sharks glided past the raft, bumping it gently. Another swam in a slow loop, its dorsal fin breaking the surface. Eli gripped the knife tightly, knowing it was useless against something that large in water. His eyes darted to the flare gun. There were 3 handheld flares in the waterproof pack, his only real deterrent. He clutched one and waited. The first real strike came at full dark. A large shark surged and slammed against the side of the raft, jolting Eli off balance. He fired the flare instinctively. A flash of red fire hissed into the water, casting light across the slick backs and wide fins surrounding him. The shark scattered briefly, agitated and disoriented by the sudden burst of heat and light. Eli sat shaking, breathing fast and shallow, listening to the wind and watching for shadows. The flare had bought him time, but not much. The sharks regrouped, circling wider now, slower but deliberate. The scent of rubber, sweat, and possibly traces of blood from a scraped knuckle filled the air. The predators closed in again. Another bump rocked the raft half an hour later. Eli readied the second flare and waited until a fin approached within arm's reach. He struck it, sending the blinding fire streaking across the surface again. The heat lit the shark's white-tipped fins and sent them twisting away. He could hear the hiss of water boiling briefly under the flare's glow. The sea returned to silence, but the tension remained thick, pressing down like the humidity in a storm. 2 hours passed. The raft listed slightly, partially deflated on one side but still afloat. The emergency position indicating radio beacon blinked steadily, its signal cutting through the dark to whoever might be listening. Eli kept the last flare in his lap, hand cramping around the handle of his knife. He hadn't seen the sharks for nearly 30 minutes and hoped they'd moved on. He allowed himself one sip of water. Then a deep thud reverberated through the floor of the raft. A larger shark had returned. It moved under the raft slowly, pushing upward as if testing the structure. Eli rose onto his knees, flare ready. The motion came again, stronger, then a bump on the side. He lit the final flare, holding it high and low in sweeping arcs, casting a halo of red into the Black Sea. The flare burned bright and loud. He shouted into the void, not as a call for help, but as a roar to hold the terror at bay. The light disoriented the sharks again, sending them sliding off into the darkness. But now Eli was out of deterrence. He sat back, eyes scanning every ripple, knife trembling in his fist. All he could do was wait. By midnight, the sky had cleared slightly. Stars blinked through breaks in the clouds. In the far distance, a light appeared, faint, flickering, growing brighter. Eli stared at it, unsure if it was real. Then came a low hum, the sound of diesel engines pushing against the sea. A massive cargo ship emerged, lit up like a floating city. They had picked up his beacon and altered course. The ship's searchlights swept the water, locking onto the tiny orange raft bobbing among the waves. A rescue boat dropped from the ship, racing toward him. Within minutes, Eli was hauled aboard, half frozen, drenched, but alive. His hands still clutched the dull blade and empty flare casing. The crew wrapped him in blankets, offered water and warmth, and radioed confirmation to authorities. Eli didn't speak much. He stared back at the ocean, wide-eyed and hollow, his mind replaying the hours adrift with death circling inches away. He hadn't been bitten, hadn't been pulled under, but something had shifted inside him during those endless moments. When he reached port days later, the story spread quickly, not because of the capsize, but because of how close the sharks had come. Comparisons were drawn to stories from World War II, torpedoed sailors surrounded by sharks with no way to defend themselves. Eli's ordeal reignited debates among sailors and survival experts. There were renewed calls for better shark deterrence and offshore raft kits, electric fields, repellents, anything stronger than a flare. Eli didn't join the public discussions. He returned home quietly, boatless, unsure if he'd ever sail solo again. The ocean had shown him something most would never see, what it feels like to be prey in the middle of nowhere, holding only fire between yourself and the dark. The Pacific Ocean was calm but vast, an endless stretch of dark water under a sky littered with stars. A 45-foot sloop named Marlin's Reach cut a steady path west of Santa Cruz, California, en route to Hawaii. On board were 4 experienced sailors, 2 men and 2 women, each with years of offshore sailing under their belts. Among them was 32-year-old deckhand Colin Reese, a former Navy mechanic turned adventurer. He was solid, strong, and well-versed in life at sea. But on the night of October 3, 2024, no training could prepare him for what was waiting beneath the surface. The day had passed without issue. The crew alternated watches, trimmed sails, logged weather updates, and cooked a hot dinner as the sun dipped low. Just before sunset, they spotted something in the water. A large dorsal fin broke the surface 100 yards behind the stern, pacing the boat silently. It belonged to a great white shark, massive and unmistakable in the clear late afternoon light. It never breached fully, never drew close, but stayed just far enough to be unsettling. It followed them for hours. The shark's presence was noted in the ship's log, but there wasn't much to do except stay alert. They had no fish aboard, no bloody water or noise to attract it. But still, it lingered. By midnight, the wind had dropped, leaving the yacht under motor power. The ocean shimmered in low moonlight, and the crew rotated shifts. Colin came up for his watch around 1:15 a.m., bundled in a wetsuit for warmth, his safety harness clipped to the cockpit rail. The air was sharp, and the waves rolled gently, almost hypnotic. He moved to secure a loose fender line hanging off the aft rail. It had slipped during the last tack and needed to be retied before it drifted too far below the surface. He unfastened his tether briefly to lean over. In one careless moment, he lost his balance on the damp deck. His boots slid sideways. He fell hard, crashed against the railing, and disappeared over the stern with a splash. The shout of water hitting the sea jolted the crew below. The woman on watch, already near the helm, threw the throttle into neutral and triggered the man overboard alarm. Floodlights blazed down from the mast, cutting into the darkness. Colin surfaced, gasping, disoriented from the fall. He treaded water and shouted, waving one arm toward the boat now slowing about 50 yards ahead. The cold bit deep, his wetsuit offering only minimal protection. He could see the crew scrambling, grabbing ropes and prepping the life sling. Then the water shifted beneath him. He felt it before he saw it. A silent surge below, pressure pushing upward. The shark had returned. In a blur, a massive shadow moved just under the surface. The great white approached without hesitation. It didn't thrash or charge blindly. It moved with terrifying control, a force drawn by the sudden splash and vibration of a lone figure in the water. Colin didn't even have time to panic before the hit came. The shark rose slightly, tilted, and clipped his right thigh with its lower jaw. The teeth tore through his wetsuit, puncturing flesh, but didn't lock. It wasn't a full bite, just a test. The shark veered away immediately, disturbed by the synthetic fabric or lack of a feeding cue. But the damage was done. Blood filled the water. Colin thrashed, his leg on fire, trying to stay afloat. The yacht spun slowly back toward him, its stern lights swinging across the waves. The crew saw him, saw the blood, and saw the fin slicing the surface again, closer this time. A crewman fired an air horn repeatedly, its blasts echoing across the waves. Another dropped the underwater noisemaker over the side, a shrieking device designed to deter marine predators. The shark flinched from the pulsing sound, turning slightly, circling wider now but not retreating. They maneuvered the yacht as close as possible, throwing a rescue line just 10 feet from Colin's position. His movements were slowing. Blood loss and cold were setting in. A second noisemaker was deployed, louder and more erratic. The shark peeled away momentarily, confused or deterred by the strange vibrations. That was their only window. The boat drifted into reach. Two of the crew leaned over, hooked the sling beneath Colin's arms, and heaved. He came aboard limp, shivering violently, his leg trailing streaks of blood. The gash on his thigh was deep, multiple punctures from serrated teeth, skin and muscle torn but not shredded. It had missed the femoral artery by inches. They packed the wound with gauze, applied pressure, and wrapped it tightly with an elastic bandage. One crew member elevated his leg while the others contacted the Coast Guard through a satellite phone. A helicopter rendezvous was arranged by daylight. Colin faded in and out of consciousness. He wasn't in shock, but close. The crew monitored him hourly, keeping him warm, talking to him, and checking his pulse. He moaned once when the boat rocked hard. They tried not to look back at the dark water still trailing in their wake. At dawn, the chopper came. The medics winched Colin up in a stretcher, fast and clinical. Within 10 minutes, he was en route to a trauma center in Monterey. The yacht continued on course, shaken but intact. They sailed in silence that morning, every eye casting regular glances over the rails. Colin survived. The bite left deep scars, physically and mentally, but he recovered. In interviews weeks later, he described the moment of impact not as pain, but as sudden pressure and confusion. The shark didn't try to eat him. It had simply responded to motion, instinct overriding hesitation. The incident made headlines, not for its gore, but for the closeness of it. A night fall, a lurking predator, and a narrow escape. Experts used the event to remind sailors of the risks offshore, not just storms or isolation, but the hidden presence of apex predators, even in seemingly open, safe waters. The shark was never seen again, but its message lingered. The ocean was its world, and anything in it was fair game.